بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وبعد، أنا ما قمت هنا مبتدراً ساحة النظم فلست بالمليء، إنما كنت هنا مرحباً بكم في حفلنا، والفخر لي. أسأل الله أن يجمعنا في جنان الخلد مع كل ولي. أيها الجمع الكريم، ماذا أقول؟ فلو حييتكم قلت السلام علي إذ أنتم أنا، فلكم أقول سلام من الله عليكم ورحمته تعالى وبركاته. مرحبا بكم، وتراحيبنا تمازجت، عربيها الفصيح مع عاميها، وعربيها مع أعجميها، فعربيها الفصيح يقول: على الطائر الميمون يا خير قادمي قدمتم فأهلا بالعلا والمكارم. وعاميها يقول: يا مرحبا ترحيبة ما لها حدود، ترحيبة يفخر بها الضيف والجار، اللي حضر يستاهل المسك والعود، واللي تغيب له جميلات الأعذار. أما بعد، راعي الحفل الرسمي سعادة وزير المواصلات والاتصالات المهندس كمال بن أحمد محمد، رئيس جمعية البحرين لشركات التقنية بيتك السيد عبيدلي، رئيس مجلس إدارة جمعية التكنولوجيا والأعمال السيد مشعل علي الحلو. سيداتي وسادتي، طابت خطاكم وتبوأتم الجنة منزلا، وأسعد الله مساءكم جميعا بألف خير. نرحب بكم في الغبقة الرمضانية السنوية التي تنظمها جمعية البحرين لشركات التقنية بيتك، ونرحب أيضاً بجميع الحاضرين معنا عبر المنصة الإلكترونية. أما الآن فاسمحوا لي أن أكمل البرنامج الافتتاحي باللغة الإنجليزية، وذلك مراعاة لضيوفنا الكرام غير المتحدثين باللغة العربية. His Excellency Engineer Kamal bin Ahmed Mohammed, the Minister of Transportation and Telecommunication. Mr. Ubaidli, BTECH Chairman. Mr. Mish'al Ali Al-Helu, the Chairman of the Technology and Business Society, TBF. Our honored and distinguished guests. Ladies and gentle people, we are so excited to have you with us here today. I'm very happy to welcome you to the annual Ramadan Ghabga that's held and managed by Bahrain Technology Society, BTECH. Annual Ramadan Ghabga is a social event that's held and managed by BTECH. We will start with the welcome remarks. So please allow me to welcome to the stage Mr. Ubaidli, the Chairman of BTECH Society.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our annual Ghabga, which is held under the patronage of His Excellency Engineer Kamal Ahmed. And we really high appreciate his presence today because it's a special occasion where a minister joins an activity, though all the COVID restrictions he's supposed to follow. But sometimes ministers has to be a little bit revolutionary in order to be able to mingle with the people. أعترف حقيقة إنه أنا حاولت أحصل غلطة على امتنان ولا غلط، سواء في مخارج الكلمات أو أحيانا I will shift to English. I was trying to just detect any mistake, grammatical, pronunciation mistake in her speech. Now I'll challenge her. No? This is the first speech that I have written, and it's approved by the board. So usually I don't recite my speech. This is, let me just find my speech. I got it. First of all, this event is very special for us because number one, we are missing two people. One is Dr. Janahi, Ibrahim Janahi. He used to be one of our attendees and he usually did participate in our activities. And one of our staff, Jane from Think Smart, I think, or Work Smart, Usually, she was one of the leading member of our team who prepared for this. Luckily enough, we have this new team, which is Imtinan, Marwa. Marwa is new, is it your first time? And somebody who's a blend, old but a new cheese. So let's give applause to the new team, please. And there is Corina as well. Where's Corina? Definitely, we are lucky enough to have the CEO, the new CEO of Tamkeen. Unfortunately, he apologized, I mean, for the last minute because he was committed for another occasion. So please, I mean, definitely, anybody from Tamkeen, Dr. Yarmo is here. So at least Tamkeen is with us as usual. So let's give applause to Dr. Yarmo. The title of this Ghabga is as Jerry told me, that it is the role of a startup in a transforming economy, which is, I mean, we admit that, and this will be the theme also of the virtual seminar or virtual transmitted by Zoom, and the speaker will be Mr. Amjad, who's the CEO of the startup of Jordan, and he will talk about the ecosystem of the startups, which is very unique. Then I'll go to my speech. You see, in Bahrain, we have an adjective called an-nashmi. And I really Googled an-nashmi to find out what an-nashmi means. To me, it is a gentleman. And tonight we have a minister who is a real gentleman, Mr. Kamal, His Excellency Kamal bin Ahmed. And when I said he's a nashmi, because to BTECH, he is really a nashmi. Whenever he finds that he can help, cooperate, or lead the way, definitely he spared no time in order to help us. And we are lucky to have a minister of telecommunication like himself. So let's give applause to him. Because a nashmi in local Bahrain is somebody who helped the neighborhood, and Mr. His Excellency Kamal is always helping us. Now, usually this nashmi has somebody who gathered the data from the neighborhood. And in BTECH, we have somebody who's the right hand of a nashmi. Can you guess who this gentleman is? He's Tariq Fakhru. Tariq now becomes the co-chairman or the co-president of BTECH. And really, he's the channel of communication between us and His Excellency Kamal. And whenever he feels His Excellency will try to say no, immediately he jumps up and convert no into yes. So let's really give applause to Mr. Fakhru. Today or tonight, my speech is divided into 3 sections. One is social. And what I mean by social, that we have a new leadership. This time we have 2 young people. One is Rashid Mohammed from Batilko. Is Rashid here? So let's give applause to Mr. Rashid. And the second is Mirza. Now he's officially a member of the board. And last but not least, Mr. Faraz, who is from Silag. So it's time that you start preparing for the farewell party, so the old generation will leave. So you'll get rid of me. This is on the social level. On the organizational level, BTECH is not anymore a local or domestic organization. Now we are chairing actually, or the president of the Arab ICT Union is BTECH member or chairman. Not only this, but we are also a new member of an organization called WITSA, which is World International has something to do with ICT. Anybody knows what is its abbreviation for? It is WITSA. So World ICT Association. So I mean, we are growing not only locally, but we are growing also regionally. That's the Arab ICT Union, and we are expanding internationally or globally. Finally, we have to say something which is, again, politically we are growing. I cannot give a speech without politics. When I say politically we are growing, we are reinforcing our relationship with the e-government, the IGO, with anybody which is related to ICT. EDB is one of them. Tamkeen is another one. And definitely with the new CEO of Tamkeen, I'm very optimistic that things will be better in the future and growing better on the qualitative and quantitative level. By this, I end my speech. Enjoy your Ghabga and looking forward to meeting you.
We would love to express our gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Osama Al-Baharna, one of the BTECH founders and former member who contributed to the overall success of the society.
Dr. Osama is one of the pillars of the founders of the BTECH Society. And we really miss his naughtiness in the board.
Next, I would like to invite Mr. Amjad Suwais, the president of Startups Joe Council from Jordan, who will present the keynote presentation about tech startups and how it drives the national economy.
مساء الخير ورمضان كريم للجميع. Good evening and Ramadan Kareem to all of you. I'm appreciative for having this invitation and giving me the opportunity to present this keynote for you. It's a pleasure to be here to shed some light about the Jordan's experience with the startups and their impact on the ecosystem. I totally understand that I have 15 minutes window for this keynote presentation. There is, a lot of information that I would like to share. Forgive me if things went fast. I have to maintain the time frame, but I'm available at any time. Should something needs clarification, you can connect with me on email or whatever convenient for you to continue such discussion. I'm not sure. Do you hear me well? Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. Let me put off the camera so to preserve the internet connection. Okay, as a start, the IT and IT-enabled sector in Jordan is highly supported by the Information and Communication Technology Association in TAJ. Since its inception, advocacy and support for the ICT sector have been on the core front of its objectives. The goal was and still is to maximize the contribution of the ICT sector towards national economy. To support the objectives that INTAJ seek, it started many planned and focused programs and initiatives, working with all stakeholders in the ecosystem and maintaining strategic partnerships with all key players, whether in Jordan, in the region, and even internationally, who all share the common goals. We can see from the slide the many initiatives and programs that INTAJ has started. The most recent ones is, as an example, the cybersecurity incubator. There are programs that have to do with women empowerment in the ICT sector, such as SheTex. Many others, but I'm focusing on one of the initiatives you can see at the top, which is the Startup Joe Council. A brief on the Jordan ICT sector. We have over 700 companies that are either direct ICT or ICT enabled companies that employs over 17,000 employees. 1/3 of such employees are females, and this number is, or this percentage is increasing year over year. The aggregate total revenues of $2 billion by 2018, and we managed, although with all the circumstances, plus or minus this figure. We have 350 plus startups in various stages. Our internet penetration is 89%. Of the core pillars that InTAJ focuses on is the human capital, improving the skills of professionals, trying to bridge the gap between the needs of the labor market and what's actually being graduated from the educational system in Jordan. As we'll see later in the presentation, the focus is on experts development. Experts, Jordan is a very small market, and the contribution to the GDP mainly comes from experts rather than selling into the local markets. InTAJ always promote the digital economy concept as the way forward for growth in Jordan. We help our members through accessing to finance, in managing a proper business enabling environment, and we focus on startups. To be honest, now I'm gonna move forward into the Startup Job Council. In specific, that's the objective of this keynote. The council is basically a continuation of InTAJ's efforts to support startups. InTAJ started supporting startups back in 2009. By 2018, they have the objective of the council is to support Jordan startups and entrepreneurs to help them innovate. A direct one-to-one support, but of course, through the council's contributions, any startup will be able to benefit either directly or indirectly sometime. To skim through this quickly, we work in a very inclusive model with all stakeholders in the ecosystem, whether they are innovation hubs, startups, support projects, the government, R&D centers, funds, and InTAJ itself. Now, what I will do, I will be focusing on the next few slides on the startups in driving the economic growth in Jordan. It's completely Jordanian based. To be honest, what was obvious to us from the start is that we should not start on focusing on the actual contribution of startups to the economy. Rather, what we want to do is to try to understand the potential of the contribution to GDP by startups. To drive higher impact, we need to understand the existing landscape of startups and entrepreneurs in Jordan, the challenges, what verticals they work in, who's who, and try to pinpoint whatever opportunities that lay out there. I'm not sure, is the presentation playing? Okay, again, just to go backward a little bit. As I said, from inception, in order for us to support the startup ecosystem and grow their contribution to the GDP in Jordan, we had to analyze the ecosystem itself. We need to understand which startups do we have, who's who, what verticals we work in, what sub-verticals they work in. We need to understand their status quo contribution in the market. We initiated 2 studies. The first one, basically the startup mapping study, which was concluded earlier this year, and another study to assess the economic contribution and potential of tech and tech-enabled startups. Both studies were supported by the GIZ and Orange Jordan. We had many stakeholders being part of this study. Now, let me go to the second slide. For the startup mapping, basically we covered 80% of all startups in Jordan. Around 278 startups were surveyed. They are all Jordan-based startups. They have active teams. They are either in development stage, sales stage, or growth stages. They have an IP or a solution that is considered cutting edge. Even if they are not registered, we even, in MVP phase, we included them in stage. Around 15% from an idea to pre-MVP stage, and 25% were actually in the MVP stage. If you can see, this is basically a graph showing the mapping of our startups. We depended on the Isaac categorization for 2 main reasons. The one, in order for us to use the internationally standard for categorization, and for us to be able to benchmark our startups against those of a neighboring country and the international ones. We looked at verticals like the e-commerce, the education tech, the cybersecurity, agriculture, the social media, entertainment, e-commerce, health, many verticals. The study exists on Intaj's website. However, I would like to share with you some findings and what we've seen, in our startups in Jordan. We have verticals that were fully covered by startups, including all their sub-verticals. Example are the e-commerce. We have 95 companies, startup companies who worked in e-commerce under the many verticals, whether business to business, business to consumers, and even in logistics. While we have great potential in other verticals like the agri-tech, the blockchain, cybersecurity, data and AI, and IoT. Now we know who's who. We know how many startups do we have. There is a starting point to understand the companies and the verticals that startups are moving into. Now it comes to see the actual impact as a status quo in Jordan, which is the subject of the other study. The study had many findings. We took a holistic approach over the full cycle of the startups. We had findings regarding the startup definition, the life cycle, the economic impact. Even we went into the social and environmental impact of such startups, what problems they have, growth barriers, entry barriers, etc. Now, this graph basically is the total entrepreneurial activity in Jordan, and it shows that it's declining. If we go back to year 2004, we had the GAM rank was around 18.3%. Now it's becoming 8.2%. And if we look at the benchmark with Arab countries and the GM, it's even less. It's declining. This basically provided as a flag, red flag for Jordan, and it shows that we need to act on it. Now, if we go to the next slide, basically it shows the impact of again, this is a status quo. This is does not represent our foreseen potential for our startups. But since we lacked a holistic approach to support the startups at the time, we thought, let's see what's on the ground and build from there. The impact on economic growth by 2016, it shows a contribution of around 169 million per the Impact MENA research, which 109 million basically was a direct contribution, and the rest was indirect contribution to the GDP. Another finding, when we compare Jordan to peer regional countries, we looked at, Jordan has a startup move since the 80s. We had many support programs, incubation, mentors, funds that, was there out in the 80s and 90s. This graph basically benchmarked Jordan against other Arab countries. If you can see, we have countries which are considered entrepreneur havens, like Jordan, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Bahrain. We have late adopters, which came a little bit late to the formula, like Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Syria. We have laggards, such as Yemen, Algeria, Egypt. Of course, the bubble size represents the GDP per capita. Now, when we look, this graph basically, again, we use another method, which is the satellite account method in statistics, to confirm the numbers that we've reached. It gave us a close figure, around 119 million JDs, around 180 US dollars, with the same split, which is around 63 to 73 to 37 direct versus indirect contribution to the economy. Now, if we compare this to other selected economies, the GDP, we can see that Jordan basically falls within the 3.9% average, as compared to 7.1% in the USA and Lebanon 3%. So we are about average, which is a good indicator. 36% of Jordan employment came from ICT startups. The average labor productivity in startups, which is basically the total revenue divided by the number of staff, is 39,000 JDs in comparison to 43 JDs for all other ICT companies. This graph basically shows the importance of experts as generated by startups. Technology-based services accounted for 31% experts from Jordan. This graph basically, the average is 60 to 40% between local and expert for technology-based services, for startups. Then the average for the ICT is 67% versus 33%. For the average economy, it was 76% versus 24%. Now, we have this is basically giving me a hard time. Just a quick findings. Our startups, they enjoy high performance potential in terms of expert intensity. They have a good employment for female. By the way, the startups are one of the highest paid sectors in Jordan within the ICT. Their contribution to the national nominal GDP is 0.5%, which 0.3% is basically direct added value. The economic impact also expands to induced investments, value chain effects, employee spending. It's a very skill intensive. The value added of Jordanian ICT sector is very high. There is a very big potential in a lot of verticals that are considered a cutting edge, in the 2020s and going forward. We have the data available. We understand our market, understand the potential for addition to the GDP and what the contribution can be. To be honest, I'm not sure. It seems that there is a problem with the. Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Amjad. And now please allow me to express my gratitude to our Ghabga sponsors, the Platinum sponsor, BTECH Labs, the Gold sponsors, المؤيد Computers Middle East, أطياف Holdings, اتصالكم, فخرو Information Technology Services, Gulf Future Business, Sala Gulf, and Work Smart for Events Management. Now we will move to have our panel discussion that's going to be moderated by a serious entrepreneur, business builder, heading the first and only cybersecurity research and development tech company in the Arab world. He holds a passion for research and innovation in the GCC. He has served the information security, cybersecurity requirements for the GCC financial sector for over 20 years. Please allow me to welcome Mr. Mirza Asrar. And please allow me to welcome our panelists, Dr. Yarmo Kutalain, the Chief Planning and Monitoring Officer of Timkeen, Mr. Yasin Abu Dawood, the Chief Development Officer and the Managing Partner of Brink Batilco, Mr. Saleh Abbas, the Managing Director of Flat 6 Labs, and Mr. Amjad Sweet, the President of Startups Joe Council from Jordan.
Good evening, everyone. Bismillah Rahman Rahim. My apologies. We have little time left, Ahmed, but you'll give us some extra time. We'll try to cover it up. Thank you for the elaborate introduction as well. Now you know who are our panelists. I can directly jump into it. The topic for today, which I need to be moderating, is tech startup driving the national economy. You see, even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was already very much on a fast track of fourth industrial revolution and digital transformation, and the businesses were forced to actually transform. But the events which happened over the last 1 year have thrust everybody into looking at technology. And our leadership in the Kingdom of Bahrain, they have already given us certain strategic directions to focus on ICT and AI. I also want to mention, just before I go to my panelists, that there was a report last year which was on the global startup ecosystem. And there in that report, it stated that Bahrain is ranked among the top 10 of African and Middle East ecosystem for funding in 2020, and is among the world's top 5 fastest growing ecosystems with fewer than 1,000 startups. So Bahrain is, mashallah, doing quite well from that angle. And one of the reasons where they were mentioning that the startups should be shifting to Bahrain is because of the wage subsidy and the liberal tax which is available here. So they expect that would become a reason for all startups which may start somewhere else but will shift into Bahrain. Let's go to our panelists, and I will jump in with Yasin. The first question with you. You see, you have to give us this rationale. Why is it so important for the national economy to have tech startups? What do you think is the rationale behind it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's always a pleasure to be with Mr. Obaidli and Mr. Hajeri. I think tech startups are essential to any economy. And I think that moving forward, especially post the pandemic, what we're going to see more and more is that tech startups are there to actually solve our problems. So we have a lot of problems in Bahrain, as many countries do. But I believe that the tech ecosystem and the startups are going to be one who solves them. So for example, today, right now in Bahrain, we import close to 96% of our food. And that was evident, especially through COVID, where obviously Saudi closed their borders, everyone closed their borders. But with tech startups, looking at food tech, agri-tech, alternative proteins and meats, we should be able to solve these problems through tech startups. Nestle will not solve our problem of food, right? It's going to be the tech startups. Now, something that's very important too is that Bahrain is a small market. It's not very big. So how do we get startups to actually come to Bahrain? Well, I think the key selling point is when we build our ecosystem is that you come to Bahrain, push your product, and then actually export it. We have some of the best laws in the world when it comes to tax, when it comes to having the best talent in the entire region right here in Bahrain. And if we utilize
I can vouch for that.
And if we utilize these tools, then we start looking at saying, well, test your product in Bahrain, utilize the market here, but don't ever depend on Bahrain as a market. We have around us, okay, close to about 3.5 billion people in a 6-hour radius around Bahrain. And what we need to do is build the product here, use all the tools that the kingdom has given us, and export all of it. And I believe startups are the key to do that.
Yeah. Yarmo, Dr. Yarmo, if I go to you from the economic point of view, what Yasin has just mentioned about the part of Bahrain becoming sort of a hub for solving these problems and then addressing the market of the Arab world completely. What's your view on that? Yeah.
Hello. All right. Good. What's my view on that? I think it's an attractive opportunity and it's definitely one worth pursuing. But I think this story, even though Bahrain is a small market, has to start at home. What I mean by that is, in answer to your earlier question, why does this matter for the national economy? To put it bluntly, this economy today has a major productivity problem. It's not the only economy in the world that has a major productivity problem. But if the growth in this country is no longer coming from oil or government spending or rapid growth in big infrastructure projects, there is really only one trick left in the book, and that trick is called productivity. The good news, it is the best source, the most sustainable source of growth in any economy. And why do startups matter? Because two things have to happen very quickly. Good news, in answer to your second question, is these problems are not unique to Bahrain. They are very much region-wide and to an extent global problems. Number one, we have to become better at coming up with new ideas and channeling capital into productive sectors. Where are the Bahraini SMEs today? Food and beverage, retail, beauty salons, basic services, construction, very, very low productivity. New kinds of companies are needed to generate new kinds of economic activity in higher productivity sectors. The other thing, which is no less important, Startups are needed to re-engineer business models. Anybody thinks after this pandemic that that is not needed, they are wrong. Every company has to do it, and startups can help fix those problems in a cost-effective and scalable manner. And if they can make it here, as the song says, they'll make it anywhere. They can succeed across the region and globally. Certainly, the problems at the end of the King Fahd Causeway are very similar to what we're seeing.
Great, thank you. Saleh, if I can ask you further to that part, you see, Bahrain is a small country, and we want to be becoming a hub of technology. Then what do you think is the role of the IT companies in Bahrain? The big IT companies which are already there, one. And secondly, if you can add to that this aspect that we as a company, as a startup companies, how can we, you think, compete with the big giants? Because the startup economy in the rest of the world is being funded with so much money and so much ecosystem of support. So how do you address it here?
Well, I'd say that you don't exactly have to compete directly with the big giant tech companies. It's more about finding the gaps that they're not filling and then taking advantage of those gaps. And in startup, that's kind of the main objective, is that you're looking to sort of identify solving problems that haven't already been solved. Because as you said, like the big tech companies, they could roll out something tomorrow and then just completely destroy someone else's business model, right? But then that's where you would be looking at, if you have the right value proposition, you would potentially always build your startup in two forms. One is to either scale it in a unique market where you could potentially become one of the main players, or to be able to get to a significant base where you end up being able to exit and be acquired to one of the big tech companies.
There are good examples in the region, right? We have got good examples. Yassine, can you mention any of them and why they were successful?
Actually, before I get to that, I did want to say one thing. Our secret weapon here in Bahrain is the people in Bahrain. During the pandemic, obviously, we had to look at other areas for business, look at other opportunities. And everywhere we went, whether it was Saudi, the Emirates, Oman, no one had the skill sets that we have in Bahrain. But I am going to agree with Yarmo on one thing. It needs a bit of a push. It needs some productivity. But if it's scaled right, Bahrain can compete and go beyond anyone in the region.
Yeah. And just to follow on to what Yassine said, like a good role that people like AWS and the other big tech companies can play is that they're upskilling a lot of the workforce as well. So a lot of these people, you'll end up seeing them go into forming their own startups. And this is where I would say in the next few years, you'll start to see a much higher level of sophistication amongst the kind of startups we see being formed in Bahrain. And these are the ones that we would expect to see being able to scale outside of Bahrain and capture other markets.
Yeah, I would like to second you on that. From my personal experience, I want to share that because I have now, alhamdulillah, 4 different startup companies in Bahrain. I've got a staff strength of more than 70. And out of that, more than 50% are Bahraini. And not only that, they're all young. I've hired all fresh graduates, and they're doing, mashallah, such a great work. It's remarkable. So very right, that aspect is there. Do we have Amjad with us online?
Yes, I am online. Go ahead.
Great. Amjad, I would like to, in fact, ask you on this aspect, because you talked about the Jordan side, that you have all these startups. What about the challenges which you think are there for somebody who's putting together a startup? What do you see as the challenges?
Well, thank you, Mirza. If you allow me, I just want to say a few stuff about what I've heard from my colleagues, starting with Yassine. I totally agree that Bahrain is a small country. So if any startup is looking to scale within Bahrain itself, this is not going to happen. The thinking process needs to have developed the product, to sell. Now, this is, by the way, the same in Jordan. And what I'm trying to say here is there is an issue that we need all to tackle, because everybody's trying to follow the same model, including Jordan. Jordan is a small country. Now, Jordan we have a very skillful resources. Actually, sometimes we want to hire resources in Jordan, we can't find them because most of the resources are exported to neighboring countries. Everybody's trying to follow the same model, and I think that there should be a collaboration, on who's who. Let's take Bahrain and Jordan as an example. Bahrain's model is trying to be a testing bed for tech-enabled startups. Jordan is trying to do the same. How can we cooperate? How can we specialize? How can we promote certain verticals in Bahrain while we complement that in Jordan? How we can cross-benefit or leverage efficiencies, skills, expertise, funds, etc. I just thought, I want to elaborate on this because this is really something that every country is trying to overcome, and it gets into competition with other countries that have the same problem. Again, back to your question. In Jordan, to be honest, the biggest problem that we have falls into two things. First, most of the tech-enabled startups are basically trying to provide a new products or cutting-edge products, technologies, concepts, etc., which yet our policies are not able to cope with. If you want to do a testing bed, you need to be enabler. You cannot be a regulator at the start. This needs a holistic approach by our government to transform from being a regulator into enabler. The Central Bank of Jordan has established a test bed for fintech-related startups, which is a good start. It's basically let's allow startups to develop their products, do the MVP, and see how it goes. Then, if this is something that's going to work, we're going to regulate it. Unfortunately, we don't have this into green tech. We don't have this into energy technology. This is one of the major issues that we face in Jordan.
I want to take you on the same point, Amjad. I want to shift to Dr. Yarmo. What is your view, especially when it comes to the regulator side as well?
Look, before I get to the regulator, let me comment on something else that was said, which I think is very important, the idea of collaboration. People become infatuated with nice ideas. One of the silly nice ideas out there is that to create a successful startup, you need a brilliant idea and lots of energy. Your chances of succeeding as a startup entrepreneur increase dramatically if you work with other people, if you have co-founders with complementary skill sets, experience, networks, etc. And I think this is one of the ideas that is central to the kind of cultural transformation that is needed here to make the startup story, startup narrative work. It is about finding bright young people and letting them fly solo, not most of the time.
So, Yarmo, is it the same thing which you have written in that article, The Trials of Resilience, how COVID-19 is driving economic change in the Arab Gulf?
Let me beat my drum. The Trials of Resilience is not an article, it's a public book, which you can all buy on Amazon or on the publisher's website. But it is one of those ideas. I think part of what has to happen for the startup agenda, for the productivity story, for all these other things to work is not just economic change, but cultural change, where people start thinking differently about investments, about company formation, etc. I think one of the good things about this horrible pandemic that we've gone through is that it has made it much more difficult for many people to indulge in the luxury of inaction. And I think more people are being pushed to consider new ideas.
Thanks. Saleh, as a closing remark, what do you think is a good advice to somebody as a leader who is going into the tech startup?
Yeah, I'd say the main thing is following on what Yarmo said is always make sure you have a strong team, you have the right kind of co-founders, you have a lot of people that try and go it solo, and they don't. Almost no one's well-rounded enough to really be able to fill in all those skill gaps to really lead a company and scale it. And on top of all of it, it's more about having a realistic mindset. I think a lot of people, when they enter into the startup journey, they don't realize how tough it's going to be, and that it's actually going to be twice the amount of work than having a normal 8-hour job. And they kind of have a dreamy idea of what they're in for. And perseverance is, I'd say, probably the one trait more than anything else that leads to success in this field.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, my esteemed panelists. Thank you, Amjad. Sorry, we don't have so much more time. I would have gone on.
Can I add something? I would like to add something. Can I do that?
Yeah,
hello?
Short comment.
I just want to comment on what Yamo said, which is 100% true. We need to focus on cultural change. What happens now that startups are getting into the startups ecosystem with a mindset to exit from day one. You don't have a product, you did not still do your MVP, but your mindset is you want to exit and you want to make money. They've seen what happened with Soup. It was sold for $600 million. 2 days afterwards, you have a flood of startups trying to go into the e-commerce sphere, which is, they are not understanding that, you have to provide a service to fill a gap. It has to be innovative, it has to be efficient, and it requires sweat. So I totally agree with that.
Thanks. Thank you all.
One more time, we would love to express our gratitude and appreciation to our Ghabga sponsors. The platinum sponsor, BTECH Labs. The gold sponsors, Al-Muayyad Computer Middle East, Atiyaf Holdings, Ittisalcom, Fakhru Information Technology Services, Gulf Future Business, Salah Gulf, and WorkSmarts for Events Management. However, I would love to thank to all of our panelists today. Now, it's with great pleasure and honor that I welcome to the stage Mr. Ahmed Al-Hujari, the board senior advisor of BTECH Society, to deliver his speech about GITEX 2021.
Thank you, Mtina. So I'm going to be the guy who's going to disturb your Ghabga or dinner, but I promise you that my presentation is light and simple, and that you don't have to worry about numbers or economy or technology. But this is something close to my heart personally, close to the heart of people within the technology. We've been doing so well. You can start the presentation. So GITEX is an event that is this year becomes 40 years old. It has proven to be the most stable and growing ICT event in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. Bahrain Pavilion started in GITEX 14 years we have done it, and this is the 15th year. You can move forward. So why GITEX? It is the closest international event in the region. It connects, you see, if you go to an event somewhere else, you are not connected to your ecosystem. It's not connected to your economy. Our economy, first is Bahrain, but second and more important is the Gulf market, and third is the international market. So this is the most practical event to be part of if you want to attract not only the Bahrain national market, but also the Gulf and international market. Moving forward, this event had grown considerably well, and we have seen a number of companies which have very great success stories. We have companies that have opened in UAE. We have seen companies and startups that have gone beyond Bahrain through this Bahrain Pavilion and GITEX. Moving forward, this is the layout of the Bahrain Pavilion for 21. The event is happening in October 17th. Am I right? 17th or 19th? 17th of October for 5 days. So we expect that there is a participation from government, from BTECH, which are very committed to the event, and about 40 ICT companies and 20 startups. 2020 was a very challenging year because of COVID and even to GITEX themselves, but Bahrain was able to be there, and thanks to the support we received from Temkeen and their commitment for the continuity, I really like to give applause for Temkeen for a tough year they had, but they were able to manage and support the ICT industry. I'm happy that many of the spaces are being booked by the ICT companies, which means they see the value of growing and how GITEX contribute to them. Can we move forward, please? So we are located in Hall 2, in the front of the entrance, and we have 4 islands, and we have some very good neighbors around us. Israel is one, if you want me to start from the beginning. And there is Poland, there is China, there is other countries, but we are very much strategically positioned. And Dubai World Trade Center and the UAE government looks highly at Bahrain for their support in participating in GITEX. Moving forward, this is how GITEX Bahrain Pavilion grew over the years. I think only year 2020 we did not see growth, and that's of course a normal situation because of the COVID and travel restriction. But we see that we hope that in 21 we are able to achieve what we achieved in 2019 in terms of participation and in terms of signing agreements and collaboration. By the way, even in 2020, there are companies who have signed agreements during GITEX, and 2 of our startups reached the semifinals for the pitch, and actually one of them went to the final pitch, and they were connected at the same time to a large number of investors. Moving forward on this, let's move forward, please. Forward. Again, forward, because I mentioned this. So what we see this year, because of Bahrain, and it's very important, the partnership. So we look forward for the partnership of everybody, whether it's the BTECH, the ICT companies, the startups, the Ministry of Transportation and Telecommunication, BTECH, and of course Temkeen. It is very important for us to sustain the growth and continuity of developing the ICT sector beyond Bahrain. Bahrain market is small, and talking to you about statistics, and these statistics never change. Now, this market size, 50% of the GCC market is in Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, by the way, is one of the biggest exhibitors, national exhibitors in GCC in GITEX. 25% is UAE market, so that makes it 75%. And then you have also between Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, we represent the other 25%. For us, this is a very good, important market if we look at it, which is it's a $40 billion worth of business annually. Moving forward. That's it. And enjoy your Ghabga, and thank you very much for listening to GITEX.
Thank you all, and most importantly, ladies and gentle people, thank you, because we highly appreciate each single one of you for attending this Ghabga event. Thank you all once again, and we hope you have a great day ahead of networking. We wish you an enjoyable night with the oud music. نتمنى لكم أمسية ممتعة على أنغام معزوفات العود العربي. أمسية آخرى ممتعة مرة أخرى. كانت معكم مقدمة الحفل الامتنان المغربي. في أمان الله. you.